Today we're starting from Masechet Pesachim, the Talmud Bavli, Scott and Son edition. I've already said the prayer before and after studying Talmud, or learning Talmud. Daf 71a1, Elu Davarin, Perek Sheish Pesachim, Bish'at Simcha, at the time of rejoicing. Footnote 1, i.e., during the festival itself and not before it. The days of the festival are when the special requirement to rejoice is in effect. Rashi, see Devarim, Sheshet Ray, Bebesher, Arba Esrei. Valekav. And in this case, it does not, for the sacrifice was slaughtered before the festival. Footnote Stein. It should be noted that the sole reason Rabbi Elazar disallows the use of this offering for Shalomim Simcha is that if it was slaughtered prior to rather than during the festival. The fact that the offering was not originally consecrated or slaughtered for the specific purpose of Shalomim Simcha is not as seen as problematic, although generally mandatory sacrifices must be consecrated for the purpose of that particular offering. Nevertheless, the Shalomim Simcha offering is an exception to this rule. See above 70a note 7. Broadly stated, it is inferred that the requirement of Shalomim Simcha is to eat some sort of sacrificial meat to increase one's joy on each of the festival days. See letter of Chazon Ish, cited as an appendix to Avi Edzri. The key point in the view of our Gemara is not from what type of sacrifice the meat comes. The key point in the view of our Gemara is not from what type of sacrifice the meat comes, but when that meat was slaughtered. It needs to be slaughtered during the holiday to qualify as Shalomim Simcha. See Rambam Hil Chagiga 2:11, conferred Tosafot 270b. Dalhe Shalomim Shechatan Ma'arav Ma'erev Yud-Vav Tet. Footnote Stein. Mishun ha-chagigan. Likewise, one cannot fulfill his Shalomim Chagiga obligation with the already slaughtered Shalomim. Have davar she'abi chuvan. For that chagiga is something which is mandatory. V'chol davar she'bechuvan einom va elam min ha-chulin and an offering and an established principle dictates that any mandatory offering may come only from unconsecrated property. Footnote Shlosh, i.e., one may not use previously consecrated property to fulfill an obligation to bring a different sacrifice. Since the Chagiga brought during the festival, the Chagiga of the 15th qualifies as a mandatory offering. The obligation to bring it is derived from Leviticus Vayikra Esrim Ve'Shalosh Be'Rishir Arba'im Ve'Achat. An animal consecrated and slaughtered as a voluntary Shalomim cannot be used to discharge that obligation. Footnote Shalosh. The Gemara The Gemara attempts to corroborate Rabbi Elazar's assertion that a voluntary shalomim slaughtered before the festival cannot serve as shalomim simcha should one eat it during the festival. Leiman masayad leyad. Say that the following variety supports Rabbi Elazar's assertion. Vahayata ak shemeach. With reference to the festival of Sukkot, the verse states, 7 days shall you celebrate to gods, and you shall be nothing but joyous. Footnote Arba. Footnote Arba. Devarim Sheis Esrei, Bebishir Hamesh Esrei. And the two verses immediately preceding this scripture explicitly states that the Sukkot holiday shall last for 7 days, and that these days shall be a time of rejoicing. See, Betim Bashir Shlosh Yisrain dash Arba Esrei. This rejoicing, as noted earlier, finds its legal expression in an obligation to partake of Shulmei Simcha each of the 7 days of the holiday. See Rashi, Dalte La Ravot Laila Yom Tov Ha Achron. Verse Shemesh Esrei, cited here, then repeats this idea, stating that one shall be nothing but joyous during the 7 days of the celebration. This latter verse is thus seen as superfluous and is expounded here to convey an additional law. Rashi converts Tosafot, Talat Hey La Rovot Lailai Yom Tov Ha Acharon. Footnote Dalet. Footnote Arba. La Rabot Laila Yom Tov Ha'achoron La Simcha. This comes to include the final night, i.e. Shemoneh Atzeret, or Eve, for rejoicing, to note Hamish. I.e. it teaches that the obligation to partake of Shemoneh Simcha is in effect not just during the 7 days and nights of Sukkot, but for an additional night as well. The Baraita now presumes that this night would be the final day of the festival, i.e. the night of the Shemoneh Atzeret holiday, which immediately follows Sukkot. See Rashi to Sukkah 48a, Dote Lavravot Leiling Yom Tov Ha'achoron. Rashi here adds that this is supplemental rejoicing obligation lasts only through the night of Shemoneh Atzeret, but is not enforced through the following day of Shemoneh Atzeret, but is not enforced through the following day of Shemoneh Atzeret. In a parallel discussion in Tractate Sukkah, Masechet Sukkah, Arba'im Ve'shmoneh a, have Rashi Dalet Hey La Ravot Laila Yom Tov Ha'achron takes the opposite position, arguing that if the obligation to partake of Shalomim applies during Shemoneh Atzeret night, it certainly applies throughout the following day, since the day represents the main part of the holiday. See Salach, who attempts to reconcile this apparent contradiction. See also Maharsha to Sukkah 42b and Maharam there. This latter position is also endorsed by Tosafot here and Tractate Pesachim, Dalatei Leilim Yom Tov Ha'acharon. Footnote Chamesh. Footnote Chamesh. Ata Omer Leilin Yom Tov Ha'acharon. Now you say, the verse means to include the final night of the festival. O Eno Elan Laila Yom Tov, Leila Yom Tov, Haurishon. But perhaps it is not so, and the verse is meant only to include the first night of the festival. Footnote Shesh. In the absence of any scriptural indication to the contrary, we would presume that this obligation to partake of Sholmei Simcha for the 7 days of the festival does not, but for the quote 7 days of the festival in quotes, does not include the very first night of the holiday. This is because one may not slaughter shalomim at night, and thus the earliest time one would have shalomim meat available to him is presumably on the first day of the festival. The Baraita suggests, however, that if we understand the repetitious nature of verse 15 as including an additional night in the rejoicing obligation, why assume that this additional night is that of the 8th day of the festival? Perhaps the Torah means that one is obligated to eat the meats of Shalomim on the first night of the festival, i.e., although he may not slaughter the Shalomim, then still, perhaps the Torah obligates him to slaughter the offering before the festival, so that it's to him immediately upon nightfall. Rashi, footnote Sheish. Footnote Sheish. Talmud's Lamar Ach Simcham Chilek. The Torah thus informs us. The Torah thus informs us otherwise, stating "but," which qualifies the content of the verse and teaches that only one of these times, the evening of the last day, is designated at a time of rejoicing. Footnote Zion. Footnote Sheva. Footnote Sheva. In general, the Torah uses the words ach, but, and rak only to limit the application of a verse. See Rashi to Eruvin 105a. Dal hey ach halak. In the end, the verse contains one inclusive implication, the additional mention of rejoicing, and one restrictive implication, the word ach, but. The Baraita's statement leaves ambiguous why the inclusive and restrictive words are applied specifically in this way. Conceivably, the Tana could have come to the opposite conclusion, that the first night of the festival is included in rejoicing, and the last night is excluded. See Rashi. Gemara now proceeds to analyze this very point. The Gemara now proceeds to analyze this very point in an effort to deduce its proof. Footnote Sheva. Footnote Zion. Footnote Sheva. The Gemara attempts to deduce its proof. My Tama. Now, why does the Tana construe the verse as including the last night and excluding the first night? Why not come to the reverse conclusion instead? Footnote Shmone. Footnote Shmone. Footnote Chet. Footnote Shmone. Footnote Chet. La'av mishon de'en lo ba'mei yismach. Is it not because of the first night of the festival one will not yet have anything with which to rejoice? Footnote Tet. The Gemara surmises that the Tana excludes the first night, since it is impossible to have the meat of Shalomim Simcha available to him by that time. To account for this, one must presume that the Tana accepts Rav Elazar's position, i.e., requires Shalmei Simcha to be slaughtered at the time of rejoicing, and thus this offering cannot be slaughtered before the festival. Since it likewise may not be slaughtered at night, we find that one cannot have Shalmei Simcha available the first evening of the festival. Rashi. Since this reasoning rests on the presumption that the Tana subscribes to Rabbi Elazar's principle, the Baraita would in effect constitute a proof of Rabbi Elazar's position. The Gemara rejects this proof. Lo, no, this is not the reason the Baraita excludes the first night. Gaditane Taman. Rather, the Tana excludes this night for the very reason taught explicitly in the Baraita. For the conclusion of that Baraita proceeds to state, Ma re'ita la rabot, Lailei Yom Tov ha'acharon. What did you see that compelled you to include the final night of the festival? Ul la hotzian Lailei Yom Tov Rishon, and to exclude the first night of the festival. Marbein ani Laila Leile Yom Tov ha'acharon. I chose to include the last night of the festival, sheyesh simchan lefanav, for it is preceded by other days of rejoicing. Matzia and ani laylay yom tov rishon, and I exclude the first night of the festival. Shem simchan lefanav, for it is not preceded by other days of rejoicing. Footnote yod. Footnote yud. Footnote yod. Footnote eser. Footnote eser. In the time periods immediately preceding Shemoneh Atzeret, i.e., the dates and nights of Sukkot, one is clearly obligated to rejoice, since it is a relatively minor novelty to suggest that this obligation remains in effect a brief period longer, as the holiday continues through Shemoneh Atzeret. By contrast, since there was no obligation to rejoice whatsoever, Daf 71a1, that Daf 71a1-71b5. Elu Davrim Masechet Pesachim. In the period prior to the festival's first night, to suggest that the rejoicing obligation begins at an earlier time constitutes a relatively great novelty. The former alternative is thus preferred. See Rabbeinu Chananel. Rabbi Elazar, as cited by Ula, however, would presumably interpret the Baraita differently, when it states that the first night is excluded because there is no rejoicing before it. Ula would construe this as meaning that there is no acceptable time that Shalomim can be slaughtered for the first night. Since no rejoicing precedes it, i.e., the slaughtering needs to happen during the holiday, and there are no festival days prior to this one. Likewise, when the Baraita states that there is rejoicing prior to the night of Shemoneh Atzeret, Rabbi Elazar construes that to mean that one is capable of slaughtering Shalomim on previous days of the holiday, for those are times of rejoicing, i.e., although the Shemoneh Atzeret is a holiday to itself, still Shalomim slaughtered on Sukkot meet the requirement of an offering slaughtered during the time of rejoicing, and can be used on Shemoneh Atzeret, Sitzlach, and Chazon Ish. Footnote Yod, or footnotes Esther. The Gemara now attempts to disprove Rabbi Elazar's assertion that an offering must be slaughtered during the festival to qualify as Shalomei Simcha. Mativ Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef challenged Rabbi Elazar's ruling from a Baraita, which states Chagigat Arba'an Asar. As for the Chagigah of the 14th, if one partakes of the sacrifice on the 15th, Yotzei va mishum simcha, he can fulfill through it his obligation of rejoicing, i.e., eating of the Shalomei Simcha. Va'ein yotzei va mishum chagigan, but he cannot fulfill through it his obligation of a chagigah, i.e., the offering cannot qualify as his chagigah of the 15th. Footnote Yod Aleph. The Gemara now presumes that the Baraita refers to a case where the one actually slaughtered a chagigah on the 14th, but merely delayed eating it until the 15th. Rashi. Thus, the Baraita's ruling that the offering can qualify as a Shalomei Simcha appears to contradict Rabbi Elazar's assertion that this offering may not be slaughtered prior to the holiday. Footnote Yod Aleph. Footnote Achadesrei. Amen. Now, if Rabbi Elazar is correct, why may one fulfill the Shalomei Simcha requirement through the sacrifice? Ha ba'inan zavicha bishat simchan ba'leka. Behold, according to him, we require the act of slaughtering the Shalomei Simcha to occur at the time of rejoicing, i.e., during the festival, and in this time that is lacking. The Gemara resolves the difficulty. Amar Rav Idi Bar Avin, Rav Idi Bar Avin said, She'ikein u'shchatan. The Baraita deals with a case where he delayed and slaughtered the animal the following day on the 15th. Footnote Yod Vet. Footnote Shtemeshrei. That Baraita points that Baraita's point concerning Shalomei Simchan then has nothing to do with when this offering must be slaughtered. It is teaching simply that an offering. His teaching is simply that an offering can qualify as Shalomei Simcha even if was not consecrated or slaughtered for that specific purpose. See above 70a Sheva im a note Sheva. Footnote Yovet footnote Demonstrate. Footnote Demonstrate. Thus, the Baraita has no bearing on Rabbi Elazar's ruling. The Gemara buttresses this interpretation of the Baraita. Amar Rav Ashi Hachi Nami Mistabara. Rav Ashi said, and so it is reasonable to explain the Baraita. Da'i lo tema hakri. For if you do not say this, you are faced with the following difficulty. Ha matnita ma'an katane la. Considering the authorship of this Baraita, who is the one who teaches it, ben teimam, it is ben teimah. Footnote Yod Gimel, footnote Shloshesrei. Footnote Shloshesrei. The full text of the Baraita cited earlier, 70a, explicitly attributes the authorship of this Baraita to ben teimah. Footnote Yod Gimel. But if the Baraita speaks of a Chagiga slaughtered as early as the 14th, why would Ben Taima even permit one to partake of it the next day, much less allow its consumption as that of Shalomei Simcha? Ben Taiman ha Pasalan la Bilina. On the contrary, Ben Taima would disqualify the meat on grounds that it was left overnight. Footnote Yod Dalet. Footnote Arba Esrei. Footnote Arba Esrei. Footnote Arba Esrei. Arba Esrei. This Baraita earlier 78. Sheva im a states that in Ben Taima's view, the Chagiga of the 14th is similar to the Pesach and may be eaten only through the dawn following its slaughter. Had he slaughtered it on the 14th, shochet. Had he slaughtered it on the 14th, then it would no longer be fit for consumption by the day of the 15th, when the Baraita states it was eaten. Rashi footnote Yodal footnote Arba Isrei footnote Arba Isrei. Shma Mina. Rather, we can infer from here that the offering the Baraita speaks of is one that was slaughtered on the 15th, and the Baraita thus has no bearing on Rabbi Elazar's ruling. The Gemara again challenges Rabbi Elazar's assertion that an offering must be slaughtered during the festival to qualify as Shalmei Simcha. Mativ Rava. Rava challenged this on the basis of the following Mishnah in Tractate Sukkah, Maschat Sukkah, Perek Tetvav, Perek Hameshetrei, Sukkah, Perek Hameshetrei, Sukkah 42b, S. Arba'im Veshtaim B. Sukkah Arba'im Veshtaim B. Footnote Tetvav. Footnote Tetvav. Footnote Hameshetrei. Ha-halel v'ha-stivchan shemona. The recitation of the full Hallel, as well as rejoicing, is mandatory all 8 days of the Sukkot festival. Footnote Tet Zion. Footnote Yod. Tet Zion. Footnote Sheshisrei. Footnote Sheshisrei. I.e., one must eat of Shalmei Simcha during each of the 8 days of the Sukkot Shemini Etzeret holiday. Shemini Etzeret holiday. Tosafot point out that this Mishnah poses a problem for Rashi, who stated earlier that there is no obligation to eat of Shalomei Simcha during the day of Shemini Etzeret. If so, what can the Mishnah mean when it states that this obligation extends for all 8 days of the holiday? The only available alternative Tosafot suggests is to suggest that Rashi views the 8-day rejoicing requirement as being met through the eating of meat on the 8th night of the festival, on which even Rashi agrees the rejoicing obligation is applicable. Tosafot, however, find various difficulties with this interpretation as well. Footnote Tet Zion, footnote Sheshisrei. Footnote Sheshisrei. Va'i amrat ba'inan zavicha bishat simcha. Now, if you say that we require the act of slaughtering the Shalomei Simcha to occur at the time of rejoicing, Simcha, the time of rejoicing, i.e. during the festival itself. Ha zimnin zagi'in de lo mashkachat la ela shiv'a. Many times you will find that there are no more than 7 days on which these offerings may be consumed. Kagon shechol Yom Tov Harishon la lihaot b'Shabbat. And any year, for example, when the first day of the festival fell on the Sabbath. Footnote Yod Zion. Footnote Yod Zion. Footnote Shevet Rei. The act of slaughtering Shalomei Simcha does not override the Sabbath in view of the fact that there is no set time. These offerings must be slaughtered. See Rambam, Hil Chagiga 1:8. Now, when the Sabbath falls on any of the intermediate days of Sukkot, the prohibition against slaughtering Shalomei Simcha does not preclude eating of this offering on that day, for one may simply slaughter the Shalomim on Friday, Yom Shishi, and leave some meat over for Shabbat meals. When, however, the first day of the holiday falls on the Shabbat, HaShabbat, this remedy cannot be applied on account of Rabbi Elazar's principle. To slaughter Shochet, the offering, Korban, on Friday, Yom Shishi, would be to do so prior to the onset of the festival, Yom Tov, which would disqualify the offering as Shalomei Simcha. Since then, the Mishnah indeed insists that eating Shalomei Simcha is required all 8 days, even when the first of these days falls on Shabbat. It would appear that Rabbi Elazar's principle is not accepted. See Rashi. The problem is particularly difficult, since when the Mishnah in Sukkah mentions other practices, it clearly takes into account whether or not they override the Shabbat. For example, the Mishnah states that the lulav and arava are sometimes taken for 6 days and sometimes for 7, or sometimes they override the Sabbath. As such, when that Mishnah mentions the rejoicing obligation, the quote rejoicing unquote obligation, we would expect it to list only 7 days of rejoicing, since clearly the slaughter of the shochet of Shalomei Simcha cannot occur on the Shabbat. Since the Mishnah instead lists 8 days, it appears that one may use meat slaughtered before this festival for Shalomei Simcha Chacham Tzvi Responsa 158, as cited in Devar Shmuel. Footnote Yod Zion. Footnote Shevet Rei. Footnote Shevet Zion. Footnote Shevet Rei. The Gemara attempts to resolve the problem. Amar Rav Huna, Bareya, the Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehudan, the son of Rabbi Yehudan, says, when the first day of Sukkot falls on the Sabbath, Shabbat, and the meat of the Shalomei Simcha is unavailable, when the first day of Sukkot falls on the Shabbat, and the meat of Shalomei Simcha is unavailable, Masamchon bisirei hargelin. Masamchu bisirei hargelin. One rejoices with the meat of the male goats of the festivals, i.e., the communal chatat offerings brought on each day of this holiday, Yom Tov. For these offerings, korbanot are indeed slaughtered on Shabbat as well. Footnote Shmona Esrei. The Torah commands a male goat to be brought as a communal chatat on each day of the Sukkot festival, seen Bamidbar Chavtet. And since this is a communal offering that must be brought at a set time, its slaughter overrides, its shochet overrides the Shabbat. Moreover, since this korban is one of the outer chatat, its blood is applied on the corners of the outer altar. Its meat, like the meat of all other such offerings, is consumed by the daf Shivaim ve'echat a shalosh Edu Davarim Perek Sheish Pesachim. Quoting the Gemara, thus suggests that when the first day of Sukkot falls on the Sabbath, Shabbat, one may compensate for the absence of the usual Shalomei Simcham by partaking of other kinds of sacrificial meat, in particular the meat of the communal chatat. Rashi's, as we mentioned earlier, the rejoicing requirement, as mentioned earlier, as the rejoicing requirement The Gemara now quotes a different version of Rabbi Elazar's ruling, in which he takes the opposite view of this issue. Ki atan when Ravin arrived in Babylonia from the land of Yisrael, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, he reported that Rabbi Elazar in fact said the following: Shalamim shechatan me'erev Yom Tov, a voluntary shalamim that one slaughtered on the eve of a festival. If he delayed eating it until the morrow, Yosei vahem mishum simcha. He can fulfill with it his obligation to bring a shalamei simcha offering. Va'ein yotzei vahem mishum hagigan, but he cannot fulfill it with it his obligation to bring a chagigah offering, i.e., the Chagigah of the 15th. The Gemara proceeds to explain. Yotzei Mashum Shtimchan, one can fulfill his Shemai Shtimcha obligation with this previously slaughtered offering. Lo ve'inan zevicham b'sha'at simchan. For as regards Shemai Simchan, we do not require the act of slaughter to occur. For as regards Shalomei Simcha, we do not require the act of slaughter to occur during the time of rejoicing, i.e., during the festival. Chaf Aleph. Chaf Aleph Esrim ve'achat. Moreover, the fact that the offering was not originally consecrated or slaughtered for the specific purpose of Shalomei Simcha is not problematic, for this is not a requirement that pertains to Shalomei Simcha. The requirement is to eat sacrificial meat of some sort. The obligation does not focus on the slaughter shochet of Shalomei, in particular. See Chazon Ish cited above 70a, Shevet im a note sheva. Footnote esrim ve'achat. Below mishum chagiga. But one cannot use this variously slaughtered shilamim to fulfill his obligation, to fulfill his chagiga obligation. Ha'vei devar shebachova. For the chagiga is something which is mandatory. B'chol devar shebachadam eno v'elam min ha'cholin. And an established principle dictates that any mandatory offering may come only from unconsecrated property. Footnote Chafet. Footnote Esrim Ve Shtaim. See footnote Esrim Ve Shtaim. See above note Shlosh. Footnote Esrim Ve Shtaim. The Gemara challenges the principle Ravin attributes to Rabbi Elazar. They challenge this for the following Baraita. V'hayatan ach shemecha. The verse states, Footnote Chav Gimel. Footnote Esrim Beshlosh. Footnote Esrim Beshlosh. The Barim Perek Sheish Yisrain. Bebsher Hamesh Yisrain. Footnote Esrim Beshlosh. Footnote Esrim Beshlosh. And you shall be nothing but joyous. La Robot Lailei Yom Tov HaChoron La Simchan. This comes to include the final night of the festival, i.e. Shemini Atzeret. Shemini Atzeret. Rejoicing. Ata Omer La Rabod Laile Yom Tov HaAchoron. Now you say the verse means to include the final night of the festival. O Enon Ela La Rabot Laile Yom Tov HaRishon. But perhaps it is not so, and the verse is meant only to include the first night of the festival. Talmud Lamar Ach Chilek. Though this informs us otherwise, stating but, which qualifies the content of the verse and teaches that only one of these times, the evening of the last day, is designated a time of rejoicing. The Gemara concludes its attempted refutation. My Taman. Now, why does the Tana construe the verse as including the last night and excluding the first night? Why not come to the reverse conclusion instead? La'av mishum da'en lo ba me yithmach. Is it not because on the first night of the festival one will not yet have anything with which to rejoice? See above note 9. Note Tesha. Footnote Esrim Ve'arba. See above note Tesha. Footnote Tesha. Footnotes. That was not footnote Tesha. Footnote Esrim Ve'arba. Footnote Esrim Ve'arba. Gemara responds with our defense of Rabbi Elazar. No, this is not the reason the Baraita excludes the first nights. Kitanya. Rather, it is for the very reason taught explicitly in the Baraita that the Tana excludes it. For in its conclusion, the Baraita states, "Ma'ra'itan la rabot leile yom tov ha'achoron." What did you see that compelled you to include the final night of the festival, Yom Tov, or lahotzi ya leile Yom Tov ha'rishon, and to exclude the first night of the festival? Me'erbein ani leile Yom Tov ha'achoron. I choose to include the last night of the festival, sheyesh simcha lefanav, for it is preceded by other days of rejoicing. Umatseya ani leile Yom Tov harishon, and I exclude the first night of the festival, Yom Tov, shein simcha lefanav. for it is not preceded by other days of rejoicing. Footnote Chafei, footnote Esrim Behamesh. Esrim Behamesh. See above note Esther. Footnote Esrim Behamesh. The Braita thus has no bearing on Rabbi Eliezer's law. The Gemara begins a new discussion. Amar Rav Kahanan. Rav Kahana says, Minayin la'emure hagigat chamisha asar. From here, where in the Torah do we derive that the sacrificial parts of the Chagigan of the 15th Shenif Salin Balinan become disqualified if left overnight before being placed on the altar? For no Chavav. The meat of this Chagiga may be eaten throughout the entire day of the 16th. Put out Esrim Sheish. The meat of this Chagiga may be eaten throughout the entire day of the 16th, like any other Shelamim. Its meat may be consumed for 2 days and the intervening night. See above 71a. Nevertheless, this verse teaches that its sacrificial parts, the emurim, which have a greater level of sanctity, must be placed on the altar before this time, by the dawn of the morning following slaughter. See also Rashi to Exodus Shemot Perek Esrim Beishlosh Bebshir Shmone Estre. See to Rashi to Shmot Perek Esrim Beishlosh Bebshir Shmone Estre. Tosafot state that the verse the Gemara cites here is the source for the established principle that the emurim of any offering may not be left past dawn of the day following slaughter. Although another verse also mentions a prohibition to leave emurim overnight, the Torah states in Exodus Shmot Perek Shloshim Beit Arban Beit Bashir Esrim Bechamesh that the emurim of the Pesach offering must be placed on the altar before dawn. Nevertheless, Pesach is a sacrifice whose meat daf shevaim ve'echat a arba elu davrim chapters perek sheish Pesachim. I'm going to pause here and get the cord for the computer before the power goes out. It's 61% now. I'm going to close up. We'll be back shortly. Basidir. Daf 71a1-71b5 אלו דברים שיש פסחים שנאמר. For with reference to the Chagiga, it is written. Footnote 27 Shmot, footnote 27 Shmot, פרק 23 בשיר 18. Footnote 27 ולא ילין חלב חגי ad boker, nor shall the fat of my chagiga offering remain all night until morning. Us mik leyan reshit, the contiguous to this phrase. The next verse states the word first. Footnote chaf chet footnote esrin ve shmone. Footnote esrin ve shmone ibids bebishir taishisre. The verse commands one to bring his first fruits to the temple, where he is to present them to the Kohen. See also the Varim esrin ve sheish achat dash Achadishre. The Gemara proceeds to expound the juxtaposition of this term first with the preceding concept of leaving Emurim until the morning. Footnote Esrim Veshmone. Footnote Esrim Veshmone. Footnote Esrim Veshmone. Thus we see that the sacrificial parts become disqualified at the dawn of the morning following the Chagiga's slaughter. Following the Chagiga's slaughter. Shochet. Another Amora, however, finds difficulty with Rabbi Kahana's statement. Matkif lan Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef challenged this, saying, Taman dachtav reshit. Rav Kahana apparently believes that the only reason we interpret Scripture as referring to the first morning after slaughter is because the Torah writes the word first in the subsequent verse. Ha lo katav reshit. Has Scripture not written first there, Rav Kahana would have us believe Havan amina mai boker. I would have said, what does Scripture mean when it says the fats may not remain until morning? Boker. But Boker Shani. Second morning. Boker Shani. And it means the second morning after slaughter. But clearly we would not have made that mistake. Mi ikan midi da vastar I sil leyan me'oratan. For is there any such thing as a sacrifice where the meat is disqualified as of the evening? Va'emorin and safra, yet its sacrificial parts which have greater sanctity are not disqualified until the following morning. Boker. Footnote Lamed, footnote Shloshim. If the verses mention of morning were construed to mean the second morning following slaughter, this would mean that the Emurim of the Chagiga of the 15th could be left until dawn of the 17th, but it would then emerge that the offerings Emurim may be left for longer than the meat. For the Chagiga's meat may be eaten only for 2 days, i.e. through the 15th until sunset of the 16th. Since it is illogical that the meats would be dealt with more stringently than the Emurim, which have greater sanctity, Rav Kahana should have just assumed that the verse dealing with the Emurim refers to leaving them past the first morning, not the second morning. Why then did he require an additional indication, the subsequent verses word first, to prove his point? Rashi, footnote Shloshim. Gemara dismisses Rav Yosef's objection. Amar Leya Abaye. Abaye said to him, Al-Alama lo, and why is this not plausible to you? A precedent for it can indeed be found. Vahadrein, Pesach Laudabi, Eleazar ben Azariah. For the Pesach offering, according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, is an example of an offering, the basar ipsil leya mechatzot, where the meat becomes disqualified for eating out as of midnight. The emurin ad safra, but the sacrificial parts would not become disqualified until morning of the new day. Footnote shloshim ve'achat. In addition, in a Baraita cited later, 120b, Kuf Chaf b, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah states that by Torah law, the meat of the Pesach offering must be consumed by midnight of Pesach's first night at Rashi. According to other Tanaim, Torah law allows the Pesach to be eaten until dawn, and the prohibition against eating it after midnight is merely rabbinic in nature. See Rambam Hil Korban Pesach 8 Shmoneh Bebshir Hameshisrei and Zavachin Hamishin Ve'Sheva B. Footnote Shloshim Ve'achat. We thus find a precedent for an offering's meat becoming disqualified before its sacrificial parts. The Gemara concedes that Rav Yosef's objection, as put forth above, can indeed be dismissed. Nevertheless, it contends that Rav Yosef's question had been misworded and that he had actually been justifiably troubled by a slightly different point. Amar Rava. Rava said, Rav Yosef kasham leyam. The following is what Rav Yosef found problematic in Rav Kahana's words. Mi ika midim. Is there really any possibility that Scripture means the second morning when it speaks of the chagigah of sacrificial parts? Da'ilo tana lavasar lo va'ein reshit. For with respect to meat, we find that a Tana does not require an indication such as the word first to conclude that Scripture refers to the first morning following slaughter. Footnote Lamed, that footnote Shoshim Veishtaim. Shoshim Veishtaim. Rav Joseph's references to a Baraita cited below. Excuse me. And that in that Baraita, a Tana cites a verse that disallows the leaving of a chagigah's meat overnight. And in analyzing that text, the Tana seems to make a basic assumption that the verse refers to the first, not the second morning following slaughter. See Rashi. Footnote Shloshim Veishtaim. Rav Kahana la'emurin ba'e reshit. But inexplicably, when it comes to sacrificial parts, which have even greater sanctity than meat, Rav Kahana does require an indication such as the word first to conclude that the scriptural disqualification applies as early as the first morning. Footnote Lamed Gimel. Footnote Shloshim Ve'Shlosh. Were it not for the word first, Rav Kahana would have concluded that when Scripture mentions morning with reference to Imarim, it means that the parts must be placed on the altar by the second morning. But Rav Yosef points out that Atana, when analyzing the same words, morning, in the context of a given offering's meat, makes the opposite assumption. He presumes it to mean that the meat must be eaten by the first morning following slaughter. Now, if the Tana makes that stringent presumption regarding meat, then certainly Rav Kahana ought to make it regarding Imarim, which possesses even greater sanctity. Rashi. Footnote Shloshim Ve'Shlosh. In his question, Rav Yosef made reference to a Tana who interprets a scriptural mention of morning with respect to meat as denoting the first morning following slaughter. The Gemara now cites the Baraita to which he refers. He. What is the Tanaic teaching Rav Yosef speaks of? It is the following, the Tanya, for it was taught in a Baraita, lo, but Yalin min Habasar, Asher Tivach, Be'erev Bayon Havrishon Labocher. The verse states, nor shall any of the flesh, basar, flesh that you slaughter, shochet, on the eve of the first day, remain overnight until the morning. Footnote Lamed Dal. Footnote Shloshim Be'arba. Shloshim Be'arba. Davarim Preg Tetvav. That is Esrin. That is not Esrin. That is Sheish Esrain. Bebishir Dalit. Bebishir Arba. The Baraita interprets the verse as referring to the Chagigah slaughtered along with the Pesach on the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan. Since this verse, which speaks of slaughtering on Erev Pesach, is construed as dealing with the Chagigah of the 14th, it seems that this offering must be slaughtered towards evening on the 14th, and not, for example, in the morning. See Rashi here and above 69b, note 26, concerning a dispute among the commentators of this matter. That was footnote Shloshim Ve'arba. Yofi Tafi Daf 71b1 Yofi Tafi. That's Daf Shevet Achat B1 Yofi Tafi. The Eludarim Perik Shesh Pesachim. Limed al Gigan Arba'a Asar. Scripture here teaches concerning the Chagigah of the 14th. She'ne'echolet Lishnei Yamim V'Layla Echad. That is, that it may be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. For when the verse forbids the leaving of meat until morning, boker, it refers to the second boker sheni, second morning, following shoket, slaughter. Footnote Aleph. Footnote achat. I.e., the verse means that one must not leave the meat over until the morning of the 16th. Thus, the offering may be eaten for 2 days, from the 14th throughout the 15th. See Rashi printed on 71a Shevaim Be'achat a. Tosafot point out a difficulty here. If the verse truly means that one must not leave the meats until the second morning, then it seems that the meat becomes disqualified no earlier than dawn of the 16th. This, though, would imply that the offering may be consumed throughout the night of the 16th, a conclusion seemingly at odds with the Baraita, which stated that the Chagigah is eaten for 1 night, not 2. Tosafot does not propose a solution to this problem. See, however, Emet Layathod for a novel approach to this problem, in which he makes the argument that in effect the Chagigah is eaten for 2 nights, but only 1 day. Footnote achat, footnote aleph, footnote achat. The Tana demonstrates how he arrives at this conclusion. O no ela lion v'layla, or perhaps you will argue that it is not so, that in reality the verse refers to the first morning after slaughter, and it allows one to consume the meat for only a single day and a night. Footnote Stein, i.e., one may eat the meat for the rest of the 14th and the following evening until dawn on the 15th. See Rashi. Footnote Stein. But we can refute this. But Shehu Omer Bayom Harishon La Boker. For when Scripture states on the first day until the morning, the Torah makes clear that Hare Boker Sheni Amur. It is the second morning, not the first, that is spoken of. Footnote Shlosh. The Baraita expounds the verse's words on the eve of the first day until the morning, as noting 3 distinct time periods. The verse in effect is saying the flesh that you slaughter on Erev Pesach, the 14th, shall be eaten throughout the first day of the festival, the 15th, but shall not be left over until the morning of the 16th. Rashi, see also Rashi to Davarim Perik Shesis Ray Mebishir Arba. Footnote Shlosh. Footnote Shlosh. Footnote Gimel. Footnote Shlosh. The Tana proceeds to entertain and attempt to interpret the verse differently. O Einod Elan Boker Rishon. O Einod Elan Boker Rishon. Or you might say, even so, when the verse mentions morning, Boker, perhaps it refers only to the first morning, Boker. And scripture is teaching that this Chagigah may be eaten only for a single day and a night, Lila. Yom de Lila. Single Yom and a Lila. Footnote Dalit. Footnote Arba. The Gemara below questions why the Tana is willing to entertain a possibility he just finished refuting in the previous clause. Rashi. Footnote Arba. The Tana concludes the Baraita with a cryptic passage. Umam en ani makayen ha chagigah ha ne'echaletz lishnei yamim v'layla echad. But how would I construe the verse that speaks of a chagigah that is eaten for 2 days and a night? 2 yamim v'layla. Yamim v'layla. Lishnei yamim v'layla. Echad. Eaten for 2 days and a night. Footnote Hamish. Footnote Hamish. The Baraita refers to an as yet unspecified verse. See next note, which proves the existence of a chagigah that is indeed eaten for 2 days. Gemara later explains which verse this is and what kind of chagigah it refers to. Rashi. Footnote Chamesh. Chutz mi zo. I would construe it as referring to a chagigah offering other than this one. Ka shehu omer bo in neder o nadeva. However, when Scripture writes, and if its shalomim is for a vow or a donation, footnote sheish vayikra zheva bebeshir sheishisrei. The verse states that when one volunteers through a vow or donation to offer an ordinary shalomim, as distinguished from a shalomim brought as a thanksgiving offering, which is dealt with in previous verses, then the offering may be eaten for 2 days and the intermediate night. In the verse, the word "im" if is seen as superfluous, and the Baraita expounds it as including even obligatory types of shalomim, chagigah offerings, in the 2-day category. Rashi. This constitutes the unspecified verse mentioned above, which confirms the existence of a chagigah eaten for 2 days. Footnote Sheish. Lamed al chagigat arba'an asar. This teaches regarding the chagigah of the 14th she'ne'echelet bishnei yamin v'layla achad, that it may be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. Footnote Sheva. The Gemara below explains the logic behind the flow of this entire paragraph. See Rashi. Footnote Sheva. Before concluding the question it had begun to ask, the Gemara pauses to clarify the meaning of the just cited Baraita. Amar in the Baraita, the master said, "O Eino Ela Boker Rishon," or what you might say, when the verse Varim Sheishisrei Bebishir Arba mentions morning, perhaps it refers only to the first morning, and Scripture is teaching that the Chagigah of the 14th may be eaten for only a single day and a night. But why is the Tana willing to consider that possibility? Ha Amart. You just said in the previous part of the Baraita, Kashehu Almeir Bayom Harishon La Boker. When Scripture states in that very same verse, on the first day until the morning, the Torah makes clear that Harei Boker Sheni Amor. It is the second morning, not the first, that is spoken of. Footnote Shmone. The Baraita had just explained that Devarim 16 Sheishisrei Bebishir Arba referred to 3 time periods, and consequently that its mention of morning denotes the morning of the 16th, not the 15th. If so, why does the Baraita again appear willing to suppose that the verse speaks of the morning of the 15th? See above notes 3 and 4. Footnote Shmone. Footnote Shmone. Why then is the Tana willing to reconsider a possibility that he had just finished rejecting? Why then is the Tana why then is the Tana willing to reconsider a possibility that he had just finished rejecting? The Gemara explains this. Amar. When the Tana again considers that the Chagigah of the 14th may be eaten only until the first morning, this is what he means to say. O Eino Elam Bishtei Chagigot HaKatov Maraber. Or perhaps Scripture is speaking of two Chagigah offerings in the same verse. Achat Chagigat Arba'an Asar. That is, one part of the verse refers to the Chagigah of the 14th, Achat Chagigat Chamisha Asar, and one part refers to the Chagigah of the 15th. Footnote Tet, footnote Tesha. Footnote Tesha, i.e., the verse is comprised of two distinct sections, each referring to a different offering. Hence, the three time periods mentioned in the verse do not all refer to the same offering, as originally presumed, see above, note 3, but to two of them. See, this then is how the verse could be read. In its first clause, the verse states, Lo yalin min ha-basar asher tizbach ba'ariv. You shall not leave over any of the meat that you have slaughtered in the evening. This is taken to mean that the offering slaughtered on Erev Pesach, the Chagigah of the 14th, may not be left overnight, i.e. past reference to leaning over. Lo yalin is interpreted in its most literal sense. As leaving over meats until the following morning. The verse then proceeds to state, Bayom harishon laboker. Bayom harishon laboker, of the first day until the morning. This is taken to mean that the offering slaughters on the first day of the festival, the first words of the verse, Asher Tizbach, that you slaughter, are seen as modifying that this latter clause as well. It may not be left until the following dawn of the morning of the 16th. Footnote Tet, footnote Tesha. Footnote Tesha, Bazo la Vokra. And the Torah would then be saying that the former becomes disqualified at its morning, the morning of the 15th. Bazo la Vokra. And the latter becomes disqualified at its morning, the morning of the 16th. Footnote Yod, footnote Eser. Footnote Yod, footnote Eser. Footnote Yud, footnote Yod, footnote Eser. What you want to call it. So see previous note. Under this interpretation, both Chagigah offerings would be eaten for only a single day and a night. Footnote Yod, footnote Yud, footnote Eser. Based on this, the Gemara proceeds to explain how the rest of the Brayata progresses, as now interpreted. The Tana proceeds to reject the interpretation that suggested Hadar Omar. The Tana then states, Ela dakaman lan ha-chagigam ha-ne'echalant lishnei yamin v'layla achad. But we have established that there does exist a chagigah which is eaten for 2 days and 1 night. Footnote echadesrei. This is established through Vayikra Perek Sheva Sheshesrei. The very verse the Tana cites next in the Baraita. See above note 6. Quote Shesh. See above note Shesh. Footnote Achadesrei. Footnote Achadesrei. Im ken in nader o navan b'may. If it is so that the above verse refers to two chagigot, each being eaten only until the next morning, then when another verse states, and if it is for daf shiva achat daf sheva ve'achat be-shtayim. Alud Yofitafi, alud davrim perek sheish pesachim. I'm going to pause here for a moment and take a break. Short break. I'll be back in a moment. He can do one kubening kaddish mishra. Daf Daf Shevaim ve'achat. Daf Shevaim ve'achat be'shnayim elu davrim per sheish Pesachim. A vow or a donation, thereby indicating that there is just a chagiga eaten for 2 days. About what kind of chagiga is it? Speaking. Footnote Yodvet. Footnote Yudvet. Footnote Demonstrate. Since we know that this verse mandates 2 days of consumption for at least one kind of chagiga, how are we to interpret it? We have just stated that all types of chagiga, both the chagiga of the 14th and that of the 15th, may be eaten for only a day and night. Footnote Demonstrate. Footnote Demonstrate. E chagigan Arba'an Asar. If you say it speaks of the Chagiga of the 14th, then that cannot be. Ha Kativ Ba Yom Laila. For you have argued that only a single day and a night is written with reference to that offering. E Chagigat Chamishan Asar. Likewise, if you say the verse speaks of the Chagiga of the 15th, this cannot be either. Ha Kativ Ba Yom Laila. For you have argued that only a single day and the night is written with reference to that offering too. The Tana thus comes to his conclusion. Ela Haid La Chagigat Chamishan Amar Asar. Ela Haid La Chagigat Chamisha Asar. Chamisha Asar. 15. Rather, we are forced to say that this verse, if it is for us avowed, it refers to the Chagiga of the 15th, and it teaches that this offering may be eaten for 2 days and a night. Vahayak kuleya kara lachagigat arba'an asar. Arba'an asar is 14, and the other verse, nor shall any remain overnight, refers in its entirety to the Chagiga of the 14th. Footnote Yod Gimel. Footnote Yud Gimel. Footnote Shlosha Sour. I.e., the verse, if it is a vowel, indicates that at least one of the two chagigot may be eaten for 2 days. It now emerges that no matter which chagiga that verse actually speaks of, we are forced to conclude that the chagiga of the 14th may be eaten for 2 days. How so? Rashi explains as follows: If it is a vowel, refers to the chagiga of the 14th, that in itself establishes that this chagiga may be eaten for 2 days. But even if we were to construe that the verse as referring to the chagiga of the 15th, that would force us to conclude the Varim to footnote Perik Sheshith Raid, but sure that's footnote Sheshith Raid, but sure Arba. The verse which speaks of 3 distinct time periods speaks exclusively of the remaining chagiga. The chagiga of the 14th. This in turn means that all 3 time periods mentioned in that verse at Pesach, when the offering is slaughtered, the first day of the festival when it is eaten, and the following morning, at which point it may not be left over. All pertain to the one offering of the chagiga of the 14th. This in effect means that this offering may be left over until the morning of the 16th, i.e., it may be eaten for 2 days. Rashi. Footnote Shloshisrei. Footnote Shloshisrei. Limed al chagigat arba'an asar shene'echalent lishnei yamim v'layla achad. All in all, then Scripture teaches regarding the chagiga of the 14th that it may be eaten for 2 days and a night. Having finished elucidating the Barayata, the Gemara resumes its explanation of Rav Yosef's question. showing why this baraita proves difficult for Rav Kahana Ta'amam. Now, the reason the Tana interprets the words morning, Devarim Sheshisrei Bebshir Arba, as meaning the second morning following slaughter, Dichtiv Bayon Harishon Laboker, is only because it is written in that verse on the first day until the morning, a phrase which forces us to say the Mai Boker, what kind of morning does the verse refer to? Boker Shani, the second morning. Footnote Yodalit, footnote Yodalit, not Babishir, footnote Yodalit, footnote Udalit, footnote Arba Asrei. As explained from the Arba Asrei, as explained above, since the verse mentions the first day as well as the morning, we are given to understand that morning refers to the morning after the first day of Pesach, the second morning following the offerings to slaughter. Footnote Yodalit. Footnote Arba Isrim. Footnote Arba Isrim. Ha kol heikal diktiv boker sataman. But by inference, then we say that whenever the word morning is written in Scripture is in an unqualified way, Boker Rishon, it denotes the first morning. Ba'af al gav belo katav beyan reshit, even though the word first is not explicitly written in a connection with it. Thus Rav Kahana ought to infer his law that the Amurim may be left over no later than a single night from the plain meaning of the verse's words morning. There is no need to expound the word first in the subsequent verse in order to prove his point. Mishnah, the following Mishnah returns to the topic with which this chapter began, namely the bringing of a Pesach offering on the Shabbat. As we learned above, although the act of slaughtering is prohibited on the Sabbath, Shabbat, this prohibition is superseded by the obligation to offer as Pesach sacrifice, Korban Pesach. It follows that if the offerings, the korban sacrifice is for some reason invalid, the slaughter of that korban sacrifice is considered to have been a desecration of the Shabbat, albeit it may be an inadvertent, i.e., unintentional one. Ordinarily, one is obligated to atone for an inadvertent shogeg, desecration of the Sabbath by bringing a chatat offering, korban chatat. And the view of some Tanaim, however, desecration of the Shabbat caused by slaughtering an invalid Pesach is exempt from this obligation. But because it was committed in the attempt to perform a required mitzvah, so a bidvar mitzvah, the controversy concerning the principle and the distinctions regarding its application are the subject of this Mishnah. Pesach sheish chaton shelo lishmon b'Shabbat. A Pesach offering that one slaughtered on the Sabbath, not for its own sake, but rather for the sake of some other type of offering. Chayav alav chatant. One is liable to a chatat on its account, for he has desecrated the Sabbath. Footnote Shabbat. The footnote tet above. Footnote Hameshisrei. Footnote Hameshisrei. As we learned above, Mishnah Hameshim Be Teisha Be Mishnah Hameshim Be Teisha Be. A Pesach slaughtered for the sake of another type of offering is invalid. Accordingly, one who slaughters a Pesach with the intention that it be a Sholomim, for example, has desecrated the Shabbat by performing the Malacha of Shketan, without following the mitzvah of offering a Pesach. Were he to do so, but Mezid willfully, i.e., knowing that it was the Shabbat and that what he was doing was forbidden, he would be liable to correct. On our Mishnah, however, speaks of a case where he mistakenly thought that one may sacrifice a Pesach on the Shabbat, even if his intention is to offer it as another sacrifice. Accordingly, his desecration is considered a shogeg, inadvertent transgression, and he is therefore liable to a chata to atone for it. Marshi, as explained by Maharsha, compared to Lach. Although there are also other mistakes that could render him a shogeg, inadvertent sinner, Rashi explains that Rashi explains that the mistake, as he does because the Gemara 72a will conclude that this case of the Mishnah deals with a person who not knowingly slaughtered the Pesach for the sake of another type of sacrifice. Accordingly, he should be considered a Mezid, willful sinner, who is not subject to a chatat. To be liable to a chatat in such a case, we must say that he thought it. We must not say that he thought it. We must say, we must say that he thought it was permissible to slaughter a Pesach on the Sabbath Shabbat even for the sake of another designation. Rashi, however, could also have said that the Mishnah speaks of a case where he simply forgot that it was the Shabbat day, Yom Shabbat, Sabbath day, Shabbat, Yom Shabbat, Smaharsha compared to Tzlach. Footnote Ameshizrain. Footnote Ameshizrain. Ushara kol the Vachim shechatan l'shem Pesach, and all other sacrifices that one slaughtered on the Sabbath on Shabbat for the sake of a Pesach offering for Korban Pesach. Footnote Tet Zion. Footnote Sheshes Reim. Footnote Sheshes Reim. For example, he slaughtered a Shulamim for the sake of a Pesach. Here, the Mishnah speaks of a case where he either forgot that it was the Sabbath Shabbat, or he thought that it was permissible to sacrifice even other offerings, korbanot, on the Shabbats for the sake of a Pesach. Rashi, for the sake of a Pesach. Rashi, since it is in fact forbidden to slaughter another sacrifice for the sake of a Pesach on the Sabbath on the Shabbat, the slaughterer should be liable to a chatat. Rabbi Akiva Eiger is in his commentary to Mishnayot wonders why Rashi did not explain the error to be that he thought the animal was actually a Pesach, since the Gemara will explain it this way, and as Rashi himself explains the next part of this case this way. See also Maharshan, see Salat Sevach Todah, who suggests an answer converted Talach. Daf 71a1-71b5. Daf 71a1-b5. Elu Davrim Perek 6 Pesachim on the Shabbat. Footnote Yod Zayin. Footnote Shavis Reim. A Pesach offering. Footnote Yod Zayin. Footnote Shavis Reim. A Pesach offering must be a male lamb or a kid or kids. A Pesach offering must be a male lamb or kid less than a year old. Shmot Dimishrei Bebishir Hamesh. Thus, if that's Shmot Dimishrei Bebishir Hamesh. Thus, if the animal he slaughtered was a female, a calf, or older than a year, then his error was not merely that he slaughtered a shalmim for the sake of a Pesach, but that he slaughtered a Pesach as a that he slaughtered as a Pesach an animal that was not even fit to be a Pesach. For this reason, all agree that he is liable to a chatat for his desecration of the Shabbat. Even Rabbi Yehoshua, who, as the Mishnah will soon state, exempts from a chatat one who errs and commits a transgression while attempting to perform a mitzvah. So a bidvar mitzvah. Since everyone knows that such animals are not fit for a Pesach offering, one who mistakenly thinks they cannot be said to have sinned while attempting to perform a mitzvah. Rashi, he cannot blame his mistake solely on the fact that he cannot blame his mistake solely on the fact that he was preoccupied with performing a mitzvah. This will be more fully explained in note 20. Footnote Yod Zayin. Va'im ra'uyin hain. Va'im ra'uyin hain. But if they are of the kind of animals that are suitable for a Pesach, footnote Yoshchet, footnote Shmoneh, that is, the animal he slaughtered for the sake of a Pesach was a male kid or lamb less than a year old, but it was not a Pesach. In his anxiety and preoccupation with the mitzvah of offering a Pesach, he forgot that he had previously consecrated this animal as a shalamim, for example, and mistakenly slaughtered it for the sake of a Pesach. Rashi, footnote Yod Chet, footnote Shmoneh Esrei. Shmoneh Israel. Footnote Shmoneh Israel. There it is a dispute. Rabbi Eliezer Machayev Hatatz. Rabbi Eliezer declares him liable to a chatatz for slaughtering them, since they are in fact not a Pesach. An animal consecrated for one type of offering cannot be sacrificed as another type of offering. Therefore, he is slaughtering the animal as a Pesach constitutes a desecration of the Sabbath Shabbat, for which he is liable to a chatatz. The fact that he committed this transgression while attempting to perform a mitzvah makes no difference according to Rabbi Eliezer Rashi, footnote Tet footnote Teshesrei. But Rabbi Yehoshua Peter, Rabbi Yehoshua Poter, but Rabbi Yehoshua exempts him from a chatat for no esrin. Rabbi Yehoshua is of the opinion that one who errs and thereby transgresses while attempting to perform a mitzvah, and who does in fact perform something of a mitzvah, though not one that overrides the Sabbath Shabbat, is exempt from a chatat. Rabbi Yehoshua observes, for this is given in Shabbat 137a, Kuf Lamed Zayin a, since the person who slaughtered a shlamim for the sake of a Pesach erred while attempting to perform a mitzvah, slaughtering a Pesach offering, and he did in fact perform something of a mitzvah, the slaughter of a shlamim offering, for most sacrifices slaughtered for the sake of another type of offering are valid for their original designations. Rabbi Yehoshua exempts him from a chatat. Rashi, although there are some Tanaim who hold that slaughtering another offering for the korban for the sake of a Pesach invalidates it no matter what type of offering it is. See above 62b. Esrim Sheshim Veishtaim B, and below Shivim Veishlosh B. But Rabbi Yehoshua is of the opinion that offerings slaughtered for the sake of a Pesach are also valid. Rashi, and the first case of the Mishnah, however, where the person slaughtered a Pesach for the sake of another type of offering, korban, even Rabbi Yehoshua agrees that he is liable, for he did not perform any mitzvah. Since the Pesach was ordered not for its own sake, is completely invalid. Mishnah above Chameshim Ve'Tesha B. Moreover, this person was not even trying to perform the mitzvah of Pesach, since he slaughtered the Pesach for the sake of a different designation. Rabbi Yehoshua also agrees in the second case, where a person slaughters a different kind of offering, korban, i.e., as shlamim, for the sake of a Pesach, and the animal is of the type of not fit to be a Pesach, that the person is indeed liable. This is because even a person preoccupied with performing the mitzvah of bringing his Pesach can be expected not to make the mistake of offering a calf or female lamb as a Pesach offering, since the unfitness of such animals is known by all. See Rashi cited in note 17. Therefore, even though this person did err in this matter, he cannot blame that error on his preoccupation with performing the mitzvah. Rather, it was the result of this ignorance of the laws of the Pesach offering. Had he known the law, he would not have erred despite his preoccupation with the mitzvah, for he would have realized that the animal before him could not possibly be a Pesach. He is consequently liable to a katat. We have followed Rashi in explaining Rabbi Yehoshua, and according to the view that it is necessary to actually perform some kind of mitzvah for the exemption to take effect, presumably because the version of the Mishnah cited by the Gemara on Shivim Veishtaim A, presumably because the version of the Mishnah cited by the Gemara on Shivim Veishtaim A reflects the dispute. This matter, however, is the subject of the dispute of the Tanaim in Shabbat Kuf Lamed Zayin A, that the Gemara below Shivim Veishtaim A, the Gemara below Shivim Veishtaim A will cite the view of Rabbi Meir, who exempts even where no mitzvah was performed. Footnote Esrim. Rabbi Eliezer attempts to prove his position for a kol v'chomer. Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Yehoshua, Ma'im ha-Pesach shehu mutar lishmo. Now, if even in the case of a Pesach, which is permitted for offering of the Sabbath for its own sake, bar sheshivna eitz shemo hachayav, Nevertheless, when one changed its designation and slaughtered it for the sake of another type of offering, he is liable to a chatat for desecrating the Shabbat. This is the achat. This is the first ruling of the Mishnah, which even Rabbi Yehoshua accepts Rashi. Then surely, in the case of other sacrifices which are forbidden on the Sabbath, Shabbat, for their own sake, if one changed their destination, it is not logical that they should be liable to a chatat for slaughtering them on the Shabbat. For no chavdet, for no esrim beishtaim. Rabbi Eliezer argues that if even the slaughter of the Pesach offering, which is the proper object of the mitzvah, makes one liable to a chatat, when it is made with the wrong intention, then certainly the wrongly intentioned slaughterer of a totally unauthorized offering should make one liable to a chatat. Rabbi Yehoshua replies, Amar lo Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, no. Im amarta basur. If you say that one is liable to a chatat in the case of the Pesach, where he's changed its designation to something forbidden on the Shabbat, for the offerings other than the Pesach are forbidden on the Shabbat. Thus, one who slaughters a Pesach for the sake of another designation has slaughtered it for the sake of something that may not be brought on the Shabbat. Rashi, in other words, his intention was for a sacrifice that may not be offered on the Shabbat. For this reason, he is liable to a chatat for kav gimel for etrim beishlosh tomar but bizvachim sheshinan ba'davar mutar. Will you say that the same must be true of our other sacrifices that one slaughtered for the sake of a Pesach offering, where he changed them to something permitted on the Shabbat for i.e. he slaughtered them for the sake of Pesach offerings, whose slaughter is permissible on the Shabbat. Thus, his intention at the time he earned was for something impermissible, and he is therefore exempt from a chatat. Rabbi Eliezer responds, Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Yehoshua, a morei zibor yochihu, the communal offerings for notes esrim bechamesh, that is the that is the required sacrifices brought on behalf of the community as part of the daily or Shabbat offerings, namely the daily Tamid offerings and the Shabbat Musaf offerings. Although the term morin usually refers to the fats and organs of a sacrifice that are burned on the altar, see above Sheshim Be Arba B, note 2, note Stein. Here it refers to the communal offerings as a whole. The literal meaning of the word moreh is those said from the root amar, i.e. the offerings mandated as communal offerings. Rashi footnote esrein behamesh. To demonstrate this point, shehen mutarin leshman, for they are permitted to be offered on the Shabbat for their own sake. Footnote esrein sheish. Footnote esrein sheish. The Torah states explicitly that the Tamid and the Musaf sacrifices be offered on the Shabbat. Bamidbar Kaf Chet B'Midbar Esrim Be'Shmonei Be'Mshut Teisha Be'Eser. See Gemara. That's not Be'Esrim Be'Teisha Teisha Eser. See Gemara above Shishin Be'Shesha Olive A. I mean Shishim. See Gemara above Shishim A. V'hashochet lishman chayav. Yet one who slaughters other sacrifices for their sake on the Shabbat is daf sheva im ve'achat b arba. Eludavrim perek sheish pesachim, liable to a chatad for doing so. For esrim ve'sheva. For example, if someone slaughtered a shlomim on the Sabbath for the sake of the communal olah, tamid, or musaf, he would be liable to a katan, even though the shlamim would be valid after the fact. Apparently, Rabbi Eliezer knew that Rabbi Yehoshua agreed with this ruling. Thus, we say that our slaughtering for the sake of something permissible on the Shabbat does not exempt from a chatat. Rabbi Yehoshua replies, Amar lo Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, no, this is not a valid demonstration. Im amarta abeimorei shtibor sheyesh lachem kitzban. If you say that there is a katan liability in the case of sacrifices improperly slaughtered for the sake of communal offerings, it is because they have a limit, i.e., only a limited number of communal offerings are slaughtered on the Pesach, i.e., there are only a limited number of communal sacrifices offered on the Shabbat, namely two Tamid offerings and two Musaf offerings, and there are thus only a limited number of people involved in their offering. Thus, once the Tamid, for example, has been slaughtered, any other person serving in the temple should be aware that the Tamid has been slaughtered and that there is no need to slaughter another one. Consequently, when someone mistakenly slaughters another offering for the sake of the Tamid, it is not his attempt to perform a mitzvah that is truly to blame for his error, but that his negligence in observing what has already been done. Had he been properly attentive, had he at least been inquired, he would not have discarded the Sabbath despite his desire to perform the mitzvah. He is therefore considered a shogeg, inadvertent sinner, since he did not mean to violate the Shabbats, but not a to'eh beidvar mitzvah, one who errs while attempting to perform a mitzvah, and he is less liable to a ktat rashid. See the next note. Tomar ba'pesach she'ein lo kitzvah. Will you say that the same is necessarily true of sacrifices improperly slaughtered for the sake of this Pesach, which has no limit, i.e., great numbers of which are slaughtered on Pesach? Note Esrim Vetesha, since every individual must participate in Pesach offering, there were a large number of people involved in slaughtering the multitudes of Pesach sacrifices being offered that day. Thus, one who sees everyone around him engage in slaughtering Pesach, and who, in his earnest desire to help, finds a lamb and slaughters it for the Pesach, only to discover that it's not a Pesach, can certainly be said to have sinned as a result of his preoccupation with performing a mitzvah, and not out of simple negligence. Even if he had already slaughtered his Pesach, so that he was no longer preoccupied with his own personal mitzvah, and he then slaughtered this other animal for the sake of whoever actually owned it, his error resulted from the sense of preoccupation with an ongoing mitzvah that surrounds him, and not simply from his own negligence. His situation is therefore not at all comparable to the case of a person who slaughtered the wrong offering for the sake of the communal Tamid Musaf offering, where once the offering has been brought, he does not see others involved in performing the mitzvah, so that he should have realized that the mitzvah had already been fulfilled. Rashi's distinction will be more fully explained in the Gemara in 72a, Shevaim Ve'Shtaim See note Esrim Ve'Shtaim there, and explaining Rabbi Yehoshua's reply to be speaking of a case where the communal offering have already been made. Rashi is following the Gemara's conclusion of Shevaim Ve'Shtaim a. In its initial discussion, the Gemara will assume that Rabbi Yehoshua speaks even of a case where he erroneously slaughtered for the sake of a communal offering before the Tamid had been offered for Esrim Ve'Teisha. The Mishnah cites another view that rejects the very basis of Rabbi Eliezer's challenge for communal offerings. Rabbi Meir says, Av Shochet L'Shem Amorei Tzibor Bator, even one who slaughters on all other sacrifices for the sake of the communal offerings, on the Sabbath is exempt from a chatat for the lamed for the shloshim, and Rabbi Meir disagrees with both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua regarding the slaughter of the sacrifices for the purpose of communal offerings. In his view, one who mistakenly offers any offering for the sake of a communal offering of any Sabbath or Shabbat or of the year is exempt from a chatat. Rashi, because the erred while attempting to perform a mitzvah for Shoshim, the Mishnah now lists other instances of slaughtering a Pesach with improper intent that render the slaughterer and liable to a chatat, shechato shelo la'achalav. If one slaughtered the Pesach for those who cannot eat it, for Shoshim ve'achat, i.e. people whose physical condition does not permit them to eat the minimum amount of Pesach meat, e.g. on an old or sick person. Rashi, see above 61a, Shishaim Be'achat Olive. I mean, 60, Shishaim, Sheshim, Sheshim Achat, Sheshim Be'achat A, footnote, Shloshim Be'achat, Vashalo Limanuya, Vashalo Limanuya, or for those not registered for it, only those registered for a Pesach before the slaughter can fulfill their obligation through it. Thus, the slaughter's intention for these unregistered people renders the offering invalid. See Mishnah 61a, Sheshim Achat Ve'achat, Sheshim Ve'achat A, Toshim Ve'stein, Toshim Ve'stein, La'aridlein Va'lit or for the uncircumcised, or for those who are tamei, Toshim Ve'shlosh, uncircumcised persons and those who are tamei may not partake of the Pesach offering and are consequently in category of non-eaters. See Mishnah Shishim Chat Olive. Chayav, he is liable to a chatat since the Pesach is invalidated by these intentions. Consequently, the Shabbat has been discredited by its slaughter, but since the slaughterer was unaware that these intentions invalidated Pesach, or he forgot that it was the Shabbat, he is liable to a chatat. Rashi, Arban, La'ochulav v'shelo la'achulav. However, if he slaughtered it for both those who can eat it and those who cannot eat it, la manuyav v'shelo limanuyav v'shelo linuyav, or for both those registered for it and those who not registered for it, the ulin la'aridlin, or for the circumcised and the uncircumcised, lat lit mein lit orin, or for both those who are tahor and those who are tamei patur, he is exempt from a chatat. Since in each of these cases the offering is valid. See above Shishim Be'achat Aleph, there was no discretion of these Shabbats. Rashi the rules for sacrifices invalidated by physical defects. If one slaughtered the Pesach on the Shabbat and it was found to have a blemish that invalidates it, he is liable to a chatat. A blemish found on a sacrifice invalidates it, since the invalidating blemishes are external and could have been discovered prior to the slaughter. By means of a thorough examination, the desecration of the Shabbat resulting from slaughtering was to sacrifice is classified as a result of negligence, and the exemption of erring while attempting to perform a mitzvah does not apply. See above note 17 and notes Chesrin as Rashi. Although a Pesach offering must be examined for blemishes for 4 days prior to the slaughter, see Gemara below Teishain Ve'Sheisha Aleph. Teishain Ve'Sheish, Aleph. And in our case, the animal was obviously not examined. It would seem that from our Mishnah that the lack of examination does not invalidate the sacrifice. It is only if the blemish is actually found that the Pesach is invalidated. See, Abed or Zura Hil Pesachim to the Reish Tet Zion, who is in doubt about this. See also Kailat Yaakov by the author of Mishkanot Yaakov to Zagla 40 Arba'im Veshtaim A and Bar Shmuel. Footnote Shoshim Beishesh. Shachaton Vanibza Tarefa Basatir. If one slaughtered the Pesach and it was found to be a treifa internally, if one slaughtered the Pesach and it was found to be a treifa internally, literally in a hidden place, he is exempt from a chatat.
certain life-threatening physical defects, most of which are listed in Chulin Arba'im Veishtaim A, when an animal's terefa literally torn off and thus forbidden, even if properly slaughtered. So some of these defects are external, but some can be seen only after the animal is killed and it's daf shevim ve'echat b5. Yovi Tofi, last page, the last daf. Elu Davrim Perik Sheish Pesachim, invalidations due to ownership. Shachato va'nodan. See that. Shachaton va'nodan shemach last. Shachaton va'nada shemashklu habalin eitz yadam. If one slaughtered the Pesach and it then became known that the owners had withdrawn from it for Lamed Tet without Shloshim Ve'Teisha, without Shloshim Ve'Teisha. Oh, I didn't read the finished footnote. And sides are examined. This is finishing the footnote. Footnote Shloshim Ve'Shmonei. The animal is killed and its insides are examined. An animal that is Reifa is also invalid to be an offering. Mishnah Zevachim Shmonaim Ve'Arba Aleph A. Shmonaim Ve'Arba A. The Temurah 20 Esrim Ve'Shmonei A. If the treifa defect was external, then the slaughterer is certainly liable, as in the previous case, since he should have examined the animal before slaughtering it. If the defect is internal, however, the slaughterer cannot be held accountable, since he has no way of knowing that the animal would prove to be defective, and most animals are not just the cleansed as a chadisrei. His desecration of the Sabbath is therefore an ones, unavoidable accident, rather than a shogeg, inadvertent transgression, and there is no chatat liability for esi rashi al-heisha shechatom v'namsan v'al mum confirm maybe footnote Masechet Pesachim ve'Shmonei. Invalidations due to ownership. Shechato v'nada shemeshakun ha'ba'alin eitz yadam. If one slaughtered the Pesach and it then became known that the owners had withdrawn from it for no shloshim ve'teisha, as long as the Pesach offering has not yet been slaughtered. See below shmonaim ve'teisha. The registered owners may withdraw from one Pesach and register on another. And in this case, they all did so, but the slaughterer did not find out until after he had slaughtered the offering, Rashi, for no shloshim ve'teisha, o shmetom, or that they had died, o shenitamu, or that they had become tamei, all of which invalidated the offering. Patur, he is exempt from a chatat, mipanei sheshechat barashut, because he slaughtered with permission for Arba'im, since the slaughterer did not know of the changed circumstances until after he slaughtered, nor had he any reason to inquire about them. His desecration of the Sabbath is considered an ones, an avoidable transgression, i.e., one due to the circumstances beyond one's due to circumstances beyond his control, for which a katat is not required. Rashi, even though he could have checked whether the owners were still alive, Torah, and registered on the offering, the sages did not trouble those working in the temple to do so, because they relied on the great majority of instances in which these conditions are customarily met. Thus, the slaughterer is exempt because he slaughtered with permission, i.e., with the permission of the sages, and he is therefore not considered negligent for not having checked Mormain today. In explanation of Rashi explains the exemption in these cases on the grounds of ones, unavoidable transgression, and not on the grounds of to'ei, bidvar, mitzvah, erring while attempting to perform a mitzvah, because even Rabbi Yehoshua does not exempt someone attempting to perform a mitzvah unless he actually succeeded in performing some mitzvah. See note 20 above. See note S3 above. But in our case, as well as the earlier case where the sacrifice was discovered to be a treifon, the offering is completely invalid, and thus no mitzvah has been performed in slaughtering it. Rabbi Yehoshua was therefore not exempt on the grounds of attempting to perform a mitzvah. Rashi is therefore compelled to explain the exemption of these on the grounds of ones, unavoidable as accident, Meromei Sadeh and Savach Torah in the explanation of Rashi, and it follows that from this that even Rabbi Eliezer, it follows from this that even Rabbi Eliezer should agree with the exemption in this case. The Gemara below 73 there is Shivaim by Shlosha B. Shivaim by Shlosh B. However, will state that Rabbi Eliezer disputes this last ruling of the Mishnah and requires a kapat. Because of this, we're Tosafot Shiva'im Beishlosh Aid Dal Hey Shchato Vanamsan Tarifan dispute Rashi's explanation and conclude that the end of the Mishnah must follow the view of the Tana, who holds that Rabbi Yehoshua exempts even where no mitzvah was performed. See, however, Romain Sadeh and Savach Todam, who strongly defend Rashi's view and other various explanations apply. The Gemara on Shiva'im by Shlosh B assumes that Rabbi Eliezer disputes the final ruling of the Mishnah for another interpretation of Rashi's view. See Agudat Edzov Ve'enin Ta'a Vadavar Matzvan Mitzvan Ar Enzhar Hamoraya Hil Shagagot Stein Bashir Shadesred. That's what are in. Up next, next show Shevaim by Daf Shevaim by Stein A1. Elu Davrim chapter 6 Pesachim. Yofi Tofi, that's it, and we are completed with today's folio. And I've already said Tefillah Lachar Hilamod, prayer after study. I've already said both of the prayers after study and prayer before study. I said that as well. Okay. Now I'm going to record the time in my Heritage Desk Diary for Tavshin Ayin Gimel 5773 from the creation of man. The year 5773 from creation of man. The time now is 10:02 according to that clock. Now calculate the time difference for how long it took. I started at 7:57, finished at 10:02. 10:02 a.m. Central Standard Time. Minus 7:57 minus 7:52 a.m. Central Standard Time. Okay, that's it. Huh. Well, I'll figure that out later. That's it.
Up next, learning Rashi's commentary on this week's parsha.